We're going to go ahead and move on quickly. This next presentation is one that's near and dear to our heart at the Iowa Water Center. We're very involved in IDA. So I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Brian Gelder. Brian Gelder grew up on a corn, soybean, hog farm near Jewell, Iowa. He attended Iowa State in agronomy and ag engineering. He then received an MS from Colorado State and a PhD from Iowa State in soil science and ag engineering, and he now researches methods to remotely send a rust recover and force visual elevation models automatically and estimate erosion on hill slopes across multiple states. And he is actually sick, and so we're very glad that he decided to brave it and make it up for us. So thanks, Melissa.
Thanks, Melissa. So hopefully my voice will come out. Yeah, so as you can guess from my research introduction, you can guess that most of my time now is spent on doing things involved with the Iowa DailyErosion project. But I want to name a few of my co-conspirators of the DailyErosion project. Rick Cruz, who kind of tries to keep the three of us, me, David James, and Daryl Hirschman, all pointing in the same direction. Daryl Hirschman's our web guy and our radar firewall and weather guy. And David James helps David James and I are both co-conspirators on the land use, land cover modeling, and the ACPF we'll talk about a little later. So our mission at the DailyErosion project is to help farmers, land managers, and the public better understand erosion dynamics and magnitude through helping estimate portions of the soil erosion process and then produce these estimates on a daily basis. So it helps farmers really understand the magnitudes of the processes that are going on their land every day. One of our longer term goals is actually establishing something like a soil erosion monitoring center for the central U.S. and beyond. And we'll get into that a little bit right at the end of this presentation with some of our expansion goals that we're currently moving on. So a little bit about our history. Couldn't bring a project like this to fruition instantly. This has been a long-term project, really, in the Department of Agronomy, and we started out with the DailyErosion Project version 1, which is estimating sheet and rill erosion, soil moisture, runoff, and rainfall. Similar things we're doing now on about 18,000 hill slopes in the state of Iowa, ranging from the order of 6 to 20 per township, using weather from the National Weather Service, NextRed, and Iowa Mesonet, giving us some soil radiation and wind speed data and temperature data. We got soils and management information from the 1997 USDA Natural Resources Inventory. So this is really the database that was driving our erosion estimates up until very recently. And what we've been doing is extrapolating these estimates out to the present. And so essentially we've been using rotations that were cataloged from 94, 95, 96, and 97, and rotating that continually out into the present. So these erosion estimates were now about 20, or these rotation estimates are getting to about 20 years old. And things have changed a lot in the last 20 years. And this project actually debuted in 2003, so we really weren't that far out of the data at that time, but things have changed quite a bit in the last decade. So here's kind of a 1,000-foot view of the DailyErosion project. On the one side, we had NextRed rainfall data coming in at about a 4-kilometer, 15-minute resolution. And we had township-level data on soils, slopes, and management. In the middle, we kind of have our web erosion process-based model. And on the lower left, we have an estimate of crop growth, which web uses to help estimate how much protection those crops are providing the soil surface. And then we have estimates of erosion, runoff, soil moisture represented on the right-hand side. And then here are some of our estimates, our output estimates that we were generating for the web for a 1-week time frame from 5th of June 2008 to 11th of June 2008, showing rainfall on the upper left. You can see that's a little higher resolution than our other products. We have a percent soil moisture in the red zone on the upper right, tons per acre soil loss on the lower right, and inches of runoff on the lower left. So now with the new, we have essentially changed all of our inputs for the new version of the DailyErosion project. We've upgraded our precipitation products, and we're using higher resolution National Weather Service data. And we've also completely reconfigured our land management database system to use remotely sensed inputs from now on. This was made possible through LiDAR elevation data collection for the state of Iowa, and then USDA GSERGO soils database, field scale land use and management data. And then this still goes into the same left erosion model and we still come out with the same estimates of soil plant growth and our soil erosion processes. One thing we have completely changed in the second version of the DailyErosion project is our modeling structure. And so we now actually model on 1,647 Huck 12 watersheds in the state of Iowa instead of the approximately 1,700 townships. So it works out very conveniently that there's about the same number of Huck 12 watersheds and townships in the state of Iowa. But we're now on a scale that is the sampling units are much more representative of watershed conditions than townships were at that level. We've got we're using a 10-meter soil survey raster, and we're using currently 2008 to 2013 NASS cropland data layer. So the rotation is based on that data. We're currently moving through an update through 2014. We get 2014 data generally a couple months after the end of the year. And we use our LiDAR-based elevation data, and then the field boundaries are actually specific to the 2009 crop year. So we need to tie everything back to one specific year to make some of our estimates. So our transition, we've transitioned to a lot of high-resolution inputs. Our hill slope profiles come from 3-meter LiDAR-derived elevation models. Our land use and management comes from this field scale land use and remotely sensed residue cover products that we developed. The soils comes from the 10-meter GSERGO soil survey. And the rainfall is now coming from a 1 by 1 kilometer, 5-minute National Weather Service product instead of the lower 4 by 4 kilometer, 15-minute product. And so this enables us to do a lot of field and watershed monitoring comparisons that we couldn't conduct before, so we can actually start analyzing model accuracy once we've progressed a little bit farther down the adoption pathway. Eventually, we're hoping to include the ephemeral gully, stream delivery, and channel erosion estimates into these as well. Our modeling framework is not limiting us, so we've got some goals of ways to expand the product as well. And we've included a much nicer user interface. One of our process problems we ran into was the DailyErosion project's hill slope profiles. We needed to use the LiDAR elevation models, but the LiDAR doesn't always flow. There's essentially digital dams created by roads, field entries, railroads, and these just are impediments to flow. And so we need to develop a process to make flow occur across these structures that should occur, or these impediments that should occur, but also retain things such as the prairie potholes in the Des Moines lobe. Those are real natural features that are truly part of the hydrologic landscape, similar to some sinkholes in northeast Iowa. And so we had to develop a process where we actually where we can remove the impediments that should be removed, but retain the true depressions. And so this is a process that I developed along with David James to essentially estimate upstream points and then a search buffer, essentially assuming symmetric, the embankments are essentially symmetric, so same upstream and downstream searching distances. And then essentially connecting lines between those upstream and downstream points and enforcing the best connection that we can find, and then actually changing the elevation in the model at that point. So once the surface is enforced, then we can begin some further processing. We have too many flow paths in the state of Iowa. We've estimated, in one single Huck 12 watershed, there's over 20,000. Well, there's more than that. We'd estimated in one single Huck 12, there was about 100,000 watershed flow paths to actually estimate. And we've got a limit of about doing 200,000, essentially around 250,000 flow paths per day. So we developed a sampling strategy where we further segmented the Huck 12 watersheds into subcatchments using a Puker-Douglas constant drop stream analysis method. And this generally creates about 250 subcatchments per Huck 12. And then we randomly select one of those flow paths in agricultural land per subcatchment. We respect the impediments to flow, such as terraces, roads, non-agricultural land. And then we also break these overland flow elements in the web erosion model at land use and soil boundaries. And I'll show you that a little bit later. So as you can see here, this is kind of our zoom in. On our upper left, we have our full-scale watershed. You can see that outlined in the darker color here. We zoom in, and you can start to see our subcatchments. So each one of those is a subcatchment in the watershed. And then we have our channel line going between all of them where the flow is condensing. And then in the upper right, we actually show the flow paths that we're actually modeling our erosion estimates on. And the black portion of the line is the full flow path to the channel, but the upper yellow portion of the line is when we call our grid order 4 portion of the flow path, and that's this portion that that's the only part of the portion that we believe is appropriate to use the sheet and real erosion component of the model on. We think concentrated flow is developing below that point, so we don't actually create estimates beyond that point. So these estimates, they're currently made, we've added a few more restrictions. They're currently made on land parcels greater than 15 acres. We feel like we have to have a minimum size just to be able to adequately assess land cover types using the remote sense products that we currently have available. And as I said, these field boundaries were originally derived from pre-2008 CLUs from the USDA Farm Service Agency, so before they were back when they were public, and then we manually edited those to reflect the 2009 Mass Cropland Data Layer. All programmatic data has been removed, and there's about 430,000 agricultural fields in Iowa. And this is essentially the process that we use to do that, where we stack essentially a number of different years of crop cover together. And this delineates common land use crop types, but it doesn't delineate common management practices. And that's why we put that field boundary layer back on there to help segregate things into both the crop types and the management types. And so this product is essentially also being used in another portion, the agricultural conservation planning framework that Mark Tomer has been leading. And this has become kind of the DailyErosion project, and the ACPF have kind of started to work hand in glove on wherever we can go, they can go, and kind of back and forth on that. So we're happy with the collaboration we're having there. And so here you can see a generalized land use map of what was field types that were corn and soybeans with continuous corn classification. We have a conservation rotation and an extended rotation, and those are different things fit in with row crops. Some of the different things from the cropland data layer. We have a mixed ag category, and then a pasture land. Mixed ag is generally pasture land thrown in with a row crop or something like that. Then getting on to management. So for the DailyErosion project for WEP, we need to estimate tillage practices. The best we can do now is to try and infer those practices from the residue cover that's left behind. So we try and detect these residue cover differences using Landsat satellites, constellation of satellites, and to detect these differences in reflectance in the middle infrared that soil and residue have. They aren't strong differences, as you can see from the upper right image. But there are differences that are distinct enough that in corn we have a very strong relationship between tillage or indexes and tillage practices. In soybeans, it's not quite as strong as this is, but it does allow us to make a pretty good estimate and place our management practice into one of these 5 pre-selected levels. So we've got a no-till class, 3 levels of mulch tillage, and then a conventional tillage, very intense tillage practice. And so here we have an example image collected in 2006 from near Story City, Iowa. And you can see just south of Story City, we have a field that is no-till here, and a field that is almost 0% residue cover here. And you can see from our index image over on the right, those fields show up very distinctly different. So the brightness level of those is very distinctly different. So we can definitely pull out the differences between no-till and conventional tillage. And we can do a pretty good job estimating in between as well. So once we have that, we can then lay our flow paths over our land use and start tracking that land use changes as we move along the water flow paths. And then we can actually start to lay the soils on top of that. And this is an example of our custom extraction to the wet soils format that David James has developed using the NRCS fiscal year 2014 soil data warehouse database. So this is essentially all the information that WEP needs to know to estimate the soil properties for WEP at that location. And so then we can again lay our flow paths over the top of our soils, and we can now track the changes in soil properties as they move down the flow path. And then here's an image showing how we actually input that information into WEP. So you can see we have a couple different tillage management practices. On the upper half of the slope, we have a continuous corn fall moldboard plow, and then the lower half we have continuous corn no-till. And we have, that's where we create the differences between OFE 1 and 2 and OFE 3 and 4. We have differences in soil types between OFE 1, OFE 2 and 3, and OFE 4. And we also have differences in slopes at each one of those. We estimate our slope at each one of those breaks, wherever we encounter a land use break or a soil break. Overland flow element. So it's a part of the modeling that WEP does internally. So WEP internally breaks every unique classifications of these management soils and slopes into an overland flow element. And so what we've done for rainfalls, we moved up from a 1 by 1 up to a 1 by 1 kilometer every 5-minute rainfall product. So we can see we start to capture even better those high intensity rainstorms than we were able to before. And we've also improved the wind speed, temperature, and solar data spatial resolution. And here's a couple screenshots from the DailyErosion project. This is our rainfall product for June 26, 2014. And so you definitely have to pick your days when you want to look at the DailyErosion project. Down at the bottom, we have a top 10 events to look at. So, especially looking at the erosion project right now, generally you're not going to see a whole lot occurring. So generally we want to go back and see something a lot of times see when something interesting is happening. And so that's a very good, easy way to find something that's visually interesting. On the upper right-hand side, you can see we do have a lot of different base layers, so you can do some different imaging techniques or visualization techniques that weren't available in the previous version. We also now produce estimates of erosion on that HUC 12 basis as well, so you can see our distribution of our erosion estimates are now made on that HUC 12 basis as well. Then we do the same thing with our runoff estimates. We currently don't have a soil moisture estimate out. We're hoping to have that out in the next 3 months or so. Process is we would move from a very simplistic the assumptions that were based in the Daily Erosion Project 1, where essentially everything was the same on a hill slope. And that was just a simple plane to this new process where we have multiple hills, multiple slope, changes in slope, changes in soil type, and changes in management classes. The averaging process to develop an average soil erosion or soil moisture estimate has become a lot more difficult. We haven't quite figured out an appropriate weighting scheme at this point. One of our goals then is to kind of expanding our vision. We want to move from the Iowa Daily Erosion Project, which essentially this is 2.0 of the Iowa Daily Erosion Project, to just the Daily Erosion Project, where we want to start adding surrounding states. We're currently in the process of bringing eastern Kansas into line. We're doing field boundary delineations to expand the agricultural conservation planning framework to that area. We also have the ACPF already created for southern Minnesota, and we have LiDAR data available for that area as well. So we're going to be adding southeastern Minnesota to the Daily Erosion Project in the next 6 months as well. Surrounding states, some of the surrounding states have expressed interest. We're kind of going based on an interest and financial interest basis. So the places that are showing definitely the most interest are where lots of places we want to go first. We are kind of somewhat limited in that we need high resolution elevation data. And so South Dakota is probably the state that's lagging furthest behind in that area. They don't have quite the high resolution data collections that a lot of the other states do. Iowa has a full collection of LiDAR data. Minnesota does. Indiana does. Kansas has data in this portion of the state that we're looking for, and we'll soon have a full data state collection. And other states are progressing along in their own collections as well. One of the things we're looking at is continuing to look at is essentially where can we take the Daily Erosion Project further. We'd like to start doing some water impairment source area estimates. Since we start having this hill slope ability, targeting hill slope ability, we can actually start looking inside the model, figuring out which source areas might be contributing to some water impairments, producing some additional steps in routing delivery estimates, and then expanding the use of Daily Erosion Project inputs such as residue cover and soil moisture. One thing we also started looking at was the estimation of yield loss across the state of Iowa. Last year, Rick Cruz made an estimate that farmers were losing about $1 billion that year in lost revenue due to our average soil loss of about 170 millimeters over the last 150 years. We're losing about an average corn yield loss of about 0.62 megagrams per hectare, about 10 or 11 bushels per acre, for those of you who don't speak metric. And there's about 8 million hectares or 20 million acres of corn in the state of Iowa last year. And if you would have sold your corn at the right time, you could have gotten about $5 a bushel or $200 a megagram. And that equals up to about $1 billion in lost revenue for the state of Iowa. So there are some economic impacts of this as well. It's not just soil conservation for soil conservation's sake. There is definitely an economic impact to this as well. I'd be remiss if I didn't end with a slide sending you off to our webpage, and that's idep.agron.iastate.edu/map. And that's I think a little bit easier way to get to than our old way was to, our old web address. And we need to acknowledge a lot of our funding sources. The Iowa State University Agronomy Department Endowment has been a big supporter of this project, both version 1 and version 2. USDA ARS through their ACPF database has been a great supporter as well as the Environmental Defense Fund helped start that ACPF vision. We've also got, our collaborators are not just from those two, USDA, ARS here in town, but also from the National Soil Erosion Lab, and the WEP gurus helping us out as well, folks at the University of Iowa and folks at the Colorado State University as well. we have time for questions? All right.
So you will hate this question. When you go to those areas, those lines that you actually getting, I don't know.
Our actual flow paths, yes.
Have you done some validation with all that? You know, when you look, for example, the year loss, have you compared that with Russell? I mean, there are not good numbers and all this stuff. I mean, where is that? You know?
So yeah, currently our biggest comparison is both with the previous version of the DailyErosion project, which was based on NRI survey data, and we've also, and that version was compared originally directly with Russell, or the Russell estimates that the NRI was making. We published that in a paper for the first DailyErosion project. Those estimates compared very favorably between the DailyErosion project, the Iowa DailyErosion project version 1, and the NRI estimates of soil erosion. They were very, very comparable, within 10% of each other. And now we were very surprised as well how close our estimates are. And our current estimates for DailyErosion project version 2 are running about 5 to 10% higher than our previous version. We think that's reasonable considering we've moved up. Erosion numbers are definitely driven by how intense rainfall is, and we're constantly moving up to higher and higher resolution rainfall data. The USLE stuff is mostly based on 30-minute peaks. We were basing DailyErosion project version 1 on 15-minute data. Now we're getting actually down to 5-minute data. So we're constantly driving the erosion process with higher and higher intensities than we were before. That's one of our things that we think is improving our estimates. And comparing version 1 versus version 2, we now actually simulate complex hill slopes on the landscape. Instead of just assuming everything is a plane, we now have erosive phases of the hill slope and depositional phases of the hill slope. Generally, that does drive things a little higher, total estimates as well. So we're happy that things are within the ranges comparing to our previous estimate, or the previous truths over these large scales. We'd like to actually get into doing some field scale validation. Currently we're just relying on the fact that WEP was well validated, and hopefully if we're feeding it quality inputs, the model should continue to be well validated as it was before when you know those inputs well.
That's a good assumption.
Yeah. And now that we have this new process, we can actually go out and ground truth. Previously, with the NRI data, we had no information as to where those locations were.
That's actually what my question was, is that how often or do you actually go out and compare visually with what your estimates are?
So for the crop cover product, we have not done any comparisons to actually independently verify how accurate the cropland data layer is. The cropland data layer is published by the USDA National Ag Statistics Service, their SARS, Spatial Analysis and Research section. And they have a published accuracy for their products, but we have not actually independently verified that their products are to the accuracy that they say they are. They use a lot of field
I was
data.
curious about tillage practices, how that compares with what your speculation is,
Yes.
as well as then your actual,
Yeah, so
the erosion that you're estimating.
yeah, so the management processes, those are probably the least well-researched portion of the product. We're still working on developing that. We have a Nutrient Research Center proposal that's currently underway to help validate these numbers. A lot of it was from PhD research I conducted back in mid-2005. And we had very good correlations in the limited area of central Iowa that we worked. We're having a little bit of difficulties expanding that, but we still feel comfortable that we can definitely capture differences between no-till and conservation, or no-till and conventional tillage. Those are definitely easy classifications to make. Breaking things into 15% residue cover versus 25% residue cover, that's much more difficult to determine at this point. But On the long term, or on the bulk average, we think we're doing a decent job. We don't think we're biasing very significantly in one way or the other.
How many years do you need to run this data before someone could compare and contrast to the NRCS national resources inventory and identify which tool is giving us a better, more accurate picture of what's going on?
Oh boy. Well, I'd probably say more data than we currently have to get myself into much trouble. We currently run the model for, with the new DailyErosion project version 2 for essentially a 1-year warm-up period before we start the modeling. So currently we've been doing estimates for 2008 to 2013, and then projecting based on 2008 crops, what happened in 2014. We essentially do a 6-year repeating rotation, which works out well for corn and soybeans. Every 6 years, it's always back rolling. It's still rolling in the same scheme, and it does pick up a lot of those longer-term trends. So we currently actually have about an 8-year estimating period, but that's about as far back as we can go with our rainfall data. They're trying to measure a little bit different thing. They're trying to measure different things. Their estimates are, the NRI's estimates really are only valid once you get them up to the state level for most things that they're trying to estimate. But our estimates are actually comparing very favorably with theirs. There are not large differences. But yeah, we're happy to say that. But the biggest thing is we're still only doing sheet rill erosion. We're not touching gully erosion yet, and that's really only maybe half of the battle. Maybe.
You mentioned some states like South Dakota are behind. How does it impact your job?
How does South Dakota's lack of LiDAR impact the product here? Well, it's just kind of limits our ability to expand into those states. Currently, right now, it's not a big impediment. There are small parts of South Dakota that have LiDAR coverage where we could go. Essentially, LiDAR coverage is our limiting factor in all of these data sets. If we can get good LiDAR elevation maps, we can move into that state, into the areas where that's available.
You don't need these.
I'm actually going to start.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure Ryan will.
Yep, I'll be around for a little bit.
There's a break until 10:45 about which train sessions will start up again, and in the environment will be in the auditorium. Public management will be over here, and then we'll be in different ecology and wildlife.